This is the process of muscular contraction. A muscle will contract as a reaction to a stimulus. For example, when a netballer sees a netball, the ball is the stimulus that they react to by moving to grab the ball. To make the muscle contract, the stimulus is picked up by sense organs, which in this example are the netballer's eyes. The image travels to the brain, which is part of the central nervous system, by sensory neurons. The brain then sends an impulse down the spinal cord, which is also part of the central nervous system, by motor neurons. When a motor neuron arrives at the muscle fibre, the impulse travels down the axon to the end of the motor neuron by saltatory conduction. An axon is surrounded by myelin sheaths, and saltatory conduction is when an impulse jumps over these sheaths, which makes it travel faster. Between the motor neuron and the muscle fibre there is a gap, which is called the neuromuscular junction or a synaptic cleft. The impulse needs to cross this neuromuscular junction to reach the muscle fibre. It can cross the neuromuscular junction because acetylcholine or ACH is released from the vesicles in the motor neuron. The acetylcholine floods the neuromuscular junction and carries the impulse to the receptor site, so it is now in the muscle fibre. Muscle fibres contain myofibril, which are made up from sarcomeres. It's these sarcomeres that shorten, which makes the muscle contract, and they do this by the two myofilaments sliding over each other, causing the Z line, which are the borders of the sarcomeres, to move closer in towards the M line, which is the middle of a sarcomere. For the two myofilaments to slide over each other, once the impulse gets to the receptor site, it travels down the T-tubular branches, which go deep inside the muscle fibre, until it reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum contains calcium, and when the impulse reaches it, it releases this calcium, and the calcium ions travel down the T-tubulus to the actin to make the actin binding site available. Without calcium, the actin binding site is covered by two proteins, troponin and tropomyosin, which cover the actin binding site, so the myosin can't bind with the actin. The calcium binds to the troponin, which displaces it, and causes the tropomyosin to also displace. This allows the myosin to bind with the actin. For the myosin to bind with the actin, it needs ATP, which is the body's form of energy. It breaks this ATP down into ADP and PI. This allows the myosin to bond with the actin. This bond is called a cross bridge. It then pulls the actin across it so they slide over each other in a rowing action. This shortens the sarcomere so the Z lines move closer together, which results in muscle contraction. For the myosin to release the actin, ATP needs to be used again. Once it's released, the myosin and actin are back to the starting point so the cycle can repeat again. There are different ways in which muscles can contract, and these contractions are used for many different movements in sport. The three types of muscular contraction are isotonic, concentric, and eccentric. All of these contract, however, they contract in different ways. Isometric contraction is where the muscle contracts but doesn't move or change in length. For example, in netball, when the player is holding the ball still, they are static, so their biceps brachii aren't moving. However, they are contracting to keep the arm bent while holding the ball and to stop the arm from straightening. Concentric contraction is where a muscle contracts and shortens. For example, in netball, when the player is shooting the ball, they extend their arm so their triceps brachii is contracting and shortening to pull the arm straight. The last type of contraction is eccentric contraction, which is when a muscle contracts and lengthens. This has to happen when a muscle is going against gravity. For example, in netball, when the player does a bounce pass, their biceps brachii is contracting because it has to control the extension of the arm, as gravity is already trying to straighten the arm. However, as the arm is straightening, it is also lengthening at the same time.